Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Monday, January 6th, 2020. And here are our top stories. U.S. drug prices continue to be on the rise, and lower income workers get a raise. But is it real? Well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a great weekend. It's Social Media Monday, and that means a look at the latest trends online about retirement, personal finance, so much more. And joining me, as always, from San Francisco, California, LinkedIn Senior Financial Services Editor, Devin Banerjee. Good morning, Devin. Welcome back. Happy New Year. Great to have you on the program.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Yeah, I'm rested and recovered and happy to be back with you.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure seeing you, a pleasure working with you, as always. What's top of mind for you this week? I know it's a new year, a lot of new news.
Yeah, a couple of newsy items this past week or last week, Jeff. So typically at the start of the new year, we see drug prices increase by the major drug makers here in the U.S. Hundreds of drug prices were risen last week by an average of 5.8%. Now that's actually a smaller increase from the previous year, but still directionally increasing. As I said, drug makers typically do this at the start of the year and then midway through the year. Pfizer really led the way this year, raising prices by an average of 9%. Now, these are, of course, what are called list prices. So this isn't exactly what consumers are paying. This isn't taking into account, the rebates, negotiated with pharmacy benefit managers, or the discounts, or insurance payments, of course. But directionally, when this is happening, that means directionally, what consumers are paying are probably increasing as well. Now, this is raising, of course, a ton of conversation for several reasons. One, of course, it's an election year, and we've seen several candidates and not candidates, including the current president, Donald Trump, talk about different ways to combat this. And, at the crux of it all is the fact that actually drug prices are far lower in many countries outside the U.S. for reasons like regulation. In Canada, for example, the government directly regulates prices of many drugs. In Europe, governments and national health services, they're directly or indirectly controlling costs through negotiating, directly with drug makers, often setting the price that manufacturers have to meet. So there's a lot of talk about what can be done in the U.S. to follow suit. And, here in the U.S., according to a Kaiser Family Foundation poll recently, 80% of Americans say their cost of prescription drugs are unreasonable. 78% say they support actually this importation these draft rules by the current administration to import drugs from Canada, for example, where they're trusted, and the Department of Health and Human Services says those drugs meet our quality standards, and that could lower the cost. So this conversation is just raging, and I think it's only going to continue this election year. Former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders, two of the, you might call them, front runners on the Democratic side, have also supported this importation type plan for drugs from countries like Canada.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, this is, along with the healthcare issue in general, being able to get the drug prices, being able to get drugs you need to treat yourself or your family, obviously very important. And as you said, it's not outside the norm to see an increase of drug prices, but this only gets passed through in some way, shape, or form to the consumer. So it's nice to see that policymakers, legislators, et cetera, are jumping in on this. And I just wonder what actually will be done, because as you said, it is an election year, but kind of warms my heart, so to speak. And you and I have talked a lot about this offline. Warms my heart to hear some of those free trade arguments to bring in drugs from outside the United States to help lower costs overall.
Yeah, and you are right to be a bit cynical or skeptical, Jeff.
Call me a cynic.
There's actually been, for the past 15 years, some draft proposals to allow this commercial importation of drugs from countries like Canada under certain circumstances, and those laws have actually never been implemented. So it is fair to be cynical, but people are looking at other countries and talking about this stark difference, and it's actually showing a lot of bipartisan support. Some people in the political business were quite surprised that this Trump administration came out and made this one of its actual top priorities, a central plank of this administration. So we are seeing support on both sides of the aisle for this, and even those staunch capitalists here in the U.S. Of course, this is a generalization, but many of them are realizing that that sometimes regulation does make sense, and that a lot of these drug makers and these companies don't have self-control, and patients do suffer as a result often. You might remember that news cycle about, I think, 24 months ago about some drugs just being increased by 15, 20x in terms of their prices. And so the self-control argument is or the lack of self-control by some of these companies argument is quite strong.
And I seem to recall that the person making that argument, at least for one drug company, didn't that person go to jail for manipulation or something, or there was some trial. But Devin, just, this healthcare in general is going up. You've reported on this on your platform and also on the network. Premiums going up just because, we're not well, people get sick. It adjusts the insurance pool, or the insurance pool has to be adjusted. Premium go up. So on top of that, now drug prices go up. I mean, and we'll talk about this in the second segment in terms of wages and salary growth, but I got to think that this is really some headwinds economically. I mean, we've had some good news in the economy over the last few weeks and months, but I got to think that this creates a little bit of headwind.
You're absolutely right. In terms of personal economics and budgeting and personal finance, health costs generally have been that most quickly rising bucket for American families. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. That now includes even things like childcare costs. So in addition to that, these drug prices continue increasing. The insurance plans and the insurance system in this country have still not been, reformed to the extent that many people would like. And so as a general bucket, health costs are really that, I think, and the data shows, are really that highest burden right now for American families.
And one of the things that we've covered on the network, in fact, last Friday, was some of these multi-employer pension plans and healthcare plans that were significantly underfunded. I know there's been a great discussion on your platform as well about that, but all of this plays into that, maintaining healthcare, whether you're a union member or someone who works for a not-for-profit or a corporation. I mean, all of this can be a burden and can weigh you down as a family. So good to see, and hopefully people will take note. I'm a little cynical, though, with the election coming up. We've got the Congress, a third of the Senate, the presidency. So there's a lot at stake, and I think a lot of people don't want to take a lot of chances. But like you, I'm optimistic and hopeful. Well, Devin, I'm going to go to commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about, and I alluded to this, of course, we're going to talk about some wage growth that was reported earlier in the week from the Federal Reserve of Atlanta. So stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta recently released some stunning news that lower-waged workers are receiving bigger raises than normal year over year. Still with us to discuss this and a lot more, Devin Banerjee, Senior Financial Services Editor with LinkedIn. Devin, thanks so much for staying around with us this morning.
Absolutely, Jeff.
Good to talk with you. So we talked about healthcare, drug prices in segment one, but it seems like there may be a little bit of good news coming out of the Federal Reserve of Atlanta. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. In the last segment, we talked about the cost side of things. Here on the income side, some good data for that lower earning, those lower paid workers here in the U.S. who have not really seen the wage growth that the upper bucket has seen in the past few years. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, some new data showing that that lower paid bucket of workers is actually seeing wages grow by about 4.5% last month. And that contrasts with about 2.9% for the upper bucket. So we're finally seeing those lower paid workers seeing their wages rise actually faster than their bosses in many cases. And this is, as we've talked about, really a sign of how strong and how tight the labor market has become, to the extent that even the bargaining power of these lower paid workers is increasing. So as you know, Jeff, typically, lower skilled, lower paid workers are easier, the more easy to replace, and they therefore struggle to command those higher wages at most points in the economic cycle. We're seeing, as I said, the labor market tight to the extent where these workers are in short enough supply where they can benefit more because of all of these opportunities being afforded to them. So as I said, that was data from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. It's being reflected by federal data by the Labor Department, showing that these production and non-supervisory workers in the private sector saw wages grow 3.7% last month. That's ahead of the average of all employees of about 3.1%. One important thing to note is that while we're seeing hourly pay for these non-manager employees growing, the average hours worked per week has actually declined this past year in 2019. So that's a sign of employers still, offering higher wages to attract workers coming in the door, but then controlling their own labor costs by keeping the hours in check. And so we've seen that. We've seen a lot of anecdotes come out on the LinkedIn platform talking about that, about the higher wages being offered, but then the hours, the number of hours not keeping up.
Yeah, number one, I think it's certainly positive. We just had a great segment on drug prices and premiums for healthcare, but a lot of costs, a lot of goods cost of goods is going up significantly. Nice to see that lower paid workers, or I would even call them, I know that people call them low skilled or no skilled or lack of skill, but I think these people have a lot of skill and a lot to give. It's nice to see that they're being recognized for that. And by the way, as we've talked about on the show, Devin, and you've told us about, people are being retooled and reskilled even among this classification of workers. So it makes me feel good that these people have more money. That means they can build emergency accounts. They can support their families with or have health care. They can go on vacations, and they can also potentially save for their retirement if they have access to an employee-based retirement plan, which we know potentially is an opportunity with the Secure Act.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's just a sign of all of those things you mentioned. They're having more options. They're having more, bargaining power when it comes to wages, when it comes to job options. Another important thing to note is that some of this is driven by what some economists call kind of an unnatural force, which is the rising of minimum wages across the country. So we have seen 29 states in the U.S. increase their minimum wages above the federal level of about $7.25 an hour, and 21 of those 29 states will have said they will increase that level again in 2020. So we're seeing some states like Washington State, for example, with minimum wages of as high as $13.50 an hour. So the reason some economists worry about that is because, and they call it unnatural, is because that can, of course, reverse, and it's not driven by pure supply and demand of labor, of course. But I think it is a good sign, obviously, that some states are taking this seriously for all those reasons you mentioned, Jeff. It's just, supporting their citizens, allowing them to save, to budget more, to save more, and to have more optionality.
Yeah, and you made me think of Emperor Palpatine when you said unnatural, because I think, the dark side of the Force has some unnatural abilities. But as I digress, because I just saw Rise of Skywalker. But in all seriousness, this sounds very positive, and I am aware that there are new minimum. I was going to say minimum required distributions, but minimum rates, wage rates in many states. But I guess the more people have in terms of discretionary income, the more they can save for emergency funds, the more they can pay their own bills, the less that they require from government, which would potentially drive down citizenry costs in terms of taxation and other areas, I would think.
Absolutely. And some of the anecdotes we're seeing in the conversation on the LinkedIn platform are extremely optimistic in terms of these lower paid workers getting, a feeling or an experience or a taste of this optionality I'm talking about and you're talking about, which is the ability to save, the ability to have more discretionary spending. And it's actually, again, this is generalization, but we're seeing it in several of the comments. We're seeing people inspired to continue, whether it's reskilling or seeking, higher paying jobs, or just supporting themselves in different ways in the job market. So that inspiration is certainly coming with higher wages.
Devin, and I don't want to take us off tangent with a couple minutes left in the segment, but one of the areas that we've seen on the network, and presumably you've seen on the platform, is sustainable investing. And to me, when I think about sustainable investing, I think about good governance. I think about, the good steward of the environment, but I also think about the citizens and, some of the requirements or helping citizens in terms of wages and growth and offering, benefits and things like that. And so that, to me, kind of falls right in line with that ESG, sustainability, impact investing that so many people are talking about.
That's absolutely right. And actually, I was just reading an article this morning by Sonia Dreisler, who's quite active on LinkedIn, saying exactly what you're saying, which is when people talk about ESG, traditionally we've very often talked about the E and the G, the environmental and the governance, factors and attributes, but a lot less about those social attributes when it comes to scoring companies or ranking investments, et cetera. And we actually saw a bit of a flurry at the end of last year, at the end of 2019, of companies coming out and talking about how they're supporting employees and workers in new ways. You may have seen some of those kind of viral videos or stories of companies looking at their balance sheet and saying we can actually support a one-time bonus. I was just reading about a real estate company that took $10 million from the balance sheet, spread it across its 200 employees as a one-time bonus, and investors actually like that. I mean, investors generally are seeing that as a sign of an inspirational leadership, inspirational management, and a place where employees are motivated. And a place where, as we talked about in this very tight labor market, both at the lower end and the higher end of the labor market, where employees need a reason or want a reason to stay at these companies and believe in their companies and believe in their leadership. And so we're seeing a lot more focus on that S factor, that social factor, about employees, about communities in which companies operate. That's really rising on the list of priorities among investors and corporate leaders.
Yeah, well, certainly good news to kick off the year, Devin. Always great seeing you. Glad you're rested. I can see the excitement in your eyes and hear it in your voice. Looking forward to speaking with you again on the podcast. Until then, take care, have a great week, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jeff.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hope you found it educational, helpful, and entertaining as well. We always try, of course. Hey, have a financial topic or someone of interest that you think we should interview? Don't forget, drop us a line. And for all the news in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.